Well, if we don't have any volunteers, we'll get started. So thank you, Allison, for coming. We have Alison Alvarez here today. She has spent a decade building big data tools for large companies in the media, automotive, and banking spaces. She became convinced that more affordable and accessible solutions should exist and applied those insights to build BlastPoint. She has emerged as an expert consultant regarding large geospatial data systems, lecturing around the country to teach people how to use data tools for themselves. Allison is an NSF Research Fellow, a Jack Kent Cook Fellow, and a Swartz Entrepreneurial Fellow. She holds 2 master's degrees from Carnegie Mellon, a 2007 MS from the Language Technologies Institute at the School of Computer Science, and a 2016 MBA from the Tepper School of Business. She is a former advisor for Y Combinator's Valor Water. So Allison, I'll let you get started.
Hi. Okay, so hopefully everybody can hear me. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm sure there are people on this call right now who might be a little sick of me. I changed my usual presentation because I just gave a lecture in I guess the class, is it called Lean Entrepreneurship anymore? Or Entrepreneurship for High Growth Companies. I guess it's called Lean Entrepreneurship now. So some of you might have seen my lecture there. So I changed it a little bit so I don't bore everybody today. And today I'm going to be focusing on the company I built actually while I was still a student at Tepper, what resources we used at Tepper and around CMU, and just talk a little bit about our story and how we got where we are right now. So if you guys aren't familiar with BlastPoint, we are a company that was founded in 2016, right there at in Mellon Hall when we were in the old in the old building. What we do is we build large software systems for enterprise companies, but also we do a lot of pro bono work for nonprofits, basically so people can understand customer journeys and what's going on with customers at every touch point. And just to give you a better idea of that, so Allison already covered this, so you probably don't need to hear any of this. I also have a kid, and I had a kid during my MBA, so if there are any moms out there in the entrepreneurial world who are really interested, hopefully you should contact me and we'll talk about that. My daughter was 2 when we started doing all this stuff. So yeah, and that's her basically as our first software tester. I guess back in the day, people had their children work on farms and I had mine test software, which is I guess what you have to do these days. So just to talk about BlastPoint, like I said, we were started in Lean Entrepreneurship. I pitched the idea and built a team. And Dave Maloney was teaching the class at the time. And at the end of the class, Dave was like, hey, do you think you're going to keep, up with this idea? And I said, yes. But in my heart, I was kind of like, no, because I wasn't sure. I had no idea that this would turn out to be my current career and the thing I've been working on for the last 5 years. I will admit it was a surprise even to me that this ended up being a thing. So that's to say that, pretty much anybody who's listening right now who's interested in starting something, business school is a really safe place, or grad school in general, I think is a safe place to explore and try new things. And at CMU, what I'm going to talk about in a little bit is there are a ton of resources that make this possible in a way that would be a lot more difficult if you were out in the regular working world. And just to give some more flavor of the kind of stuff we do. So we predict adoption behaviors around new technology, and the big place right now is we work for one of the top 5 automakers. So understanding who's going to buy electrical vehicles or who's going to buy new driverless or utilize new driverless car technologies. We work primarily for utilities. So for example, we understand who can switch from paper billing to e-billing, so that saves tons of money in postage. We also can tell if someone's not going to pay their bill in the next couple of months. That was very valuable during COVID. We are good at understanding how to talk to people, what channels to find them in. Is it going to be a Facebook ad? Are they going to click on this email? If you call them, will they pick up the phone? So that's the kind of stuff we're really good at. And our technology is it's got this AI core to it, but what we do is we work with customers to understand their business initiatives. We take their existing customer data. So we say that we work with your existing team, your existing data infrastructure, and we augment it with additional data resources that we have. We use those data resources to build segmentation and personas. And then we build it in such a way that it's usable by pretty much everybody at the org structure. So it can be anybody from your BI team all the way to your salesperson on the sales floor. And it's, since everything's based on personas, it's a lot easier to understand what people want. So, a lot of times what we do is, I'm looking out my window right now and I can see my neighborhood. And, one of the really big things we did during COVID was we could tell based on fluctuations in behavior who was negatively impacted economically by COVID. It turned out, just looking in the Western Pennsylvania area, it's 1 out of every 8 households. So we could point to individual rooftops and say, affected, affected, not affected. And as you can imagine, that's something that's really valuable in a lot of different industries with a lot of different large players. We've been mainly focusing in utilities because they're the ones who I think are one of the sectors of the economy that's the furthest behind in having this kind of analytics available. And we offer out of the box solutions. So it was a really good fit for what we do. So this is my co-founder, Tomer. We met at a Connects workshop. And because Dave made me pitch, it was the very first one. And he knew that I had an idea that I was considering working on in class. And he made me stand up and pitch on the spot. Tomer heard my pitch, thought it was really interesting, came up to me after the workshop, and we've been working together ever since. Like we hadn't even met. We hadn't even been in the same room together prior to that. And we were kind of both there on chance. I actually got babysitting. It was a Saturday. So I was able to be there. And I can say it's literally true that Connects workshops changed my life. And so he is my CTO, I'm the CEO. And it also turns out he's really good at selling stuff. So that's been really amazing. Some people are sole founders. I would never, ever, ever want to do this alone. So I'd say I'm going to talk about some of the stuff the resources that I've gotten from Carnegie Mellon, just being a student and having available resources. I'd say this is my best resources, is networking with other people, finding people to work with who are like-minded, and honestly, growing and developing together as innovators and leaders. And I would not have been able to do that if I hadn't had a chance. And Tomer came from ECE, so he was on the other side of campus in a completely different program. And it's really great having another technical co-founder, who understands business. It's been really remarkable. So going into this, this is a long list. I'm going to talk about this stuff because as students at Carnegie Mellon, there's a ton of stuff that is at your fingertips that you might not be aware of. Some of which I'm sure the Swartz Center, who's a bullet point on this list, I'm sure they've taken a lot of time to make sure you know about. But just in case, I want to talk about the stuff on this list and how it helped us along on our journey. So this is in no particular order. This is basically I worked until midnight last night. And so I sat down and I generated this as quickly as I could. Normally I would be a lot more thoughtful about the order and and the information about the stuff. But this is the life of being in a startup. So please forgive me for the disorganization that is usually not characteristic of me. So I'm going to start with Project Olympus, who's run by Kit Needham. So Project Olympus, if you guys aren't aware, man, I don't know, I'm going to really admit up front, I don't know how much things are not in place during COVID. So you might want to take what I say with a grain of salt. But one of the things that Project Olympus offered us was workspace, meeting space. I know for a lot of our companion companies coming out of CMU, they had permanent office locations there. There's also Kit, who's an amazing resource. She will tell it to you straight if she thinks something does or does not have potential. And it's also a meeting space for other people in the community. So for example, we ended up being an Alpha Lab company. We had our first Alpha Lab office hours at Project Olympus, so we were able to meet with them, and it ended up being a really good network for us. There's a little bit of cash you can potentially get with Project Olympus that will help get your company off the ground. The one thing I'm always going to say is when you're first building a business, if there is cash potentially for you to use for anything, you should go get it. And Project Olympus is one of those sources. I would say, don't hesitate. It's a really special place. Like, we also have the Sports Center, which is sort of like the other side of that coin. I'll get back to the library. So two things you have that come with the Sports Center are the insights of both Alison and Sonia. I really want to include them as being one of the big strengths of the Sports Center, because they see everything that comes through there. And like, the secret is you should be really nice to them, because they understand everything. And if they like you, they will tell you things. And for us, that's been really beneficial. We were able to use, we had, when we were there in 2016, we did not have the amazing Sports Center that you guys have right now. It is a magnificent palace to my eyes. But we still had access to the EIR. We still had access to the conference rooms there. We had access to a lot of advice. And when everybody, if there was a talk coming through that was important, the Sports Center always let us know about it. And so they were a really, really great resource. Man, you guys have office space now. You have no idea how jealous I am of that. Like at the bottom of the list, I list the lobby, because like, we didn't have that. Tomer and I, after, we graduated, we basically every Tuesday and Thursday met in the lobby at the Melonhead, and spent hours there just basically figuring out our company and moving it forward. So we had a place to meet that was like, a nice neutral ground. My toddler was not there. We had a lot more, just a lot more space to focus on work. And man, you guys have this beautiful place now. I'm so jealous. And I hope you guys, if you're thinking about developing a business idea, you take advantage of that. And again, I don't know how it is during COVID. Hopefully by next fall, it's back to normal when it comes to working in group spaces together. So I'll go back to the library. Yeah, Hunt Library, it has a lot of books. It has a lot of research. There's a lot of databases and data you'd have access to, so you can basically do really accurate market sizing. There's a ton of resources for it. The reference librarians are really, really good there. The other thing I'll say is that you can rent equipment from the library. So when we were doing the McGinnis Venture Competition, also on the list, one of the things you have to do is you have to create videos, and that's almost your main deliverable. And if you're just filming stuff on phones, one of the issues is the audio is not always great. And so they have a couple of resources like cameras, like Rode mics that you can rent, which means that you can have a lot more quality in the videos that you put together and deliver for the McGinnis competition. And I'll say, phone camera is not as good 5 years ago, but for us, having that resource meant that our video looked a lot more professional. And that those first couple of levels of competition, because I think we had to have we turned in an initial video and then we had 2 refinements, and having just a slightly more professional look at that first level, there's a lot of competition and it's really difficult to hand out or stand out. That is one way to possibly do it. So, for EIRs, I already mentioned them. So the EIR that was in the Sports Center when we were there was our first angel investor. And they've seen a lot of things, and they've done a lot of things. Carnegie Mellon Tepper School of Business also has a lot of people who have done things hands-on, both on the investing and building startup side of the community. And the big benefit is that everybody makes mistakes when building their own business. The benefit of having those sorts of advisors around is that you can see what they regret, what they did, mistakes that they made, and you can make sure that you make different mistakes, and they might not catch you as early and kill you before you have a chance to correct and get on the right path. So I'd say they are a fantastic resource. Definitely seek them out. I think one of the hardest things I had to learn how to do was demand people's, or request people's time, not demand, because I feel like people are busy. It's hard to ask for that stuff. But the way the EIRs were set up in, at Tepper when I was there, was that they're there, this is their main job. So I'd say definitely take advantage of it. So I already mentioned the McGinnis competition. I think it's one of the greatest places to fail safely. And if you're a business student, you should do it both years. And it's because you'll do it the first year, you'll learn how, because they have actual VCs and angel investors doing a lot of the judging. You'll see how they think in the questions they ask, and then you can refine everything and then go back the next year and just win that whole thing. For us, when we won it, it was our first seed money. So we had, like, I think we got $2,000 from Project Olympus. The McGinnis competition was like, not enough money to, like, I don't know, build a blimp. But it was enough to make a difference. And also it was a proof point to show that we were on the right track for something that could potentially be a real business. So I think it's just a really good litmus test, is like what you're doing the right thing. And I'll say, sometimes having a startup that you're working on can be a bit like having a bad boyfriend, girlfriend, significant other, because like they're taking all your attention, they're taking your love and your time, and there might be something out there that's better for you, that's a better match with what your skills are. And I think these litmus tests are really good. It's a really safe place to have them, because it happens before you, because like we're all in grad school. We're probably going to be like not worrying about paying for food or rent. So the thing that ends up being the most valuable thing is making sure that you spend your time in the most optimal way as possible, and understanding the opportunity costs is extremely important. So even if you don't win, getting really frank feedback. Dave Mooney always said, like, you're nobody that nobody sent. I think getting over that piece of it is a really important thing to learn, and I think these competitions really help. Speaking of other competitions, there's the venture capital investment competition, which is sort of the flip side of this, where you're learning how to value startups, understanding like what goes into a term sheet. So for me, like, I think I took a class ostensibly that taught me all this stuff, but I really learned it in BCIC. So understanding what all the terms in a term sheet mean, how you negotiate over them, what's really important, what's going to kill your valuation later on down the road. Understanding that and this competition's like once a year. I had a kid and I was able to do it. So I think if you have even a small amount of free time, it's really, really, really worth doing. And if you win, I think we got a free trip to Texas. So I definitely think it's something that, just so you understand where investors are coming from. Because for me, being a startup founder, sure, I work on our product. I do a lot of our finance. I do a lot of our leadership. But honestly, my job is to keep our company alive with money. And some of that we do with revenue, some of that we do with investment. And so that investment is what gets us over that hill. Last year we were break even. We had our first more than $1 million year, but I would not have gotten there unless I had that investment to get me over that hump. So, okay, I've already mentioned Connects workshops. That's where we are right now. I think the value is very clear. So moving on to the next column, I want to talk about 99 Tartans. And that also goes with 2 points down, CMU Alumni, because that's generally who's on the panel. I think I'm pitching there today. It's a source of money from people who are CMU alumni, who will understand where you came from. And I have to really thank Alejandra for hooking me up with them, because I've talked to a couple of investors in 99 Tartans, and I've gotten like really good feedback, really honest feedback about what we're on the right track for, what they're going to be looking for us, if they're investing in us for Series A, what they'd be looking for. So, now that we're preparing for that, like, what should we have in place? So I'd say really, really great resource. Next, I'd say, I've mentioned, some of the professors, but like for real, I think the professors that I talked to, so I took Gaining Advantage Through Sales, which we ended up using a lot of the principles around. I took pricing strategy, which ended up being really important because pricing software is very difficult. I took consumer behavior, marketing research. There's a ton of really, really great classes that I think, they might not appear to fall under the umbrella of entrepreneurship. But even if you don't take those classes, you can usually get time with those professors to talk to you about what you could be doing better. And honestly, like, one of the things we learned from consumer behavior and from pricing strategy was having exploding discounts. We own the company. We can say when discounts go away, but we would say to our customers, like, look, if you end up signing up with us within the next 2 weeks, you will get X discount, but beyond that, no discount. And honestly, like, we can say when the discount goes away, but it definitely would prompt people to make decisions a lot faster than they would otherwise. So it's really important, really foundational principles we learned through there. I'd say Pittsburgh in general is the next thing that I think is a really big potential resource. We have quite a few customers in Pittsburgh. There's a lot of companies that are willing to take a chance on smaller technology-focused companies. There's also an entire apparatus outside of CMU, including incubators. There's Ben Franklin funds, Innovation Works, everything. And this city is trying really hard to grow, maintain, and keep tech companies. And there's a lot of resources outside of CMU proper, but in the immediate area, they're like a bus ride away that will get you to that next level. And speaking of which, so there's that CMU Silicon Valley Trek. So this is mainly for the business students that I'm talking to. Usually it takes place during the spring. And this is when you go to Silicon Valley, you go and meet lots of other companies. You can see, a few years down the road, what you could potentially be building. You can see how many people they have. You can see what they look like, what the office space is like. And also, I think more importantly, is you end up meeting investors and making connections with investors. So for us, we met a few investors, and these investors are like A, B, round investors. So that stuff didn't matter as much 4 years ago when I was meeting them. But now that we're considering raising large quantities of capital, I'm so glad that I built these relationships and maintained them from that time onward. And additionally, like, I think it's really good to get to know Silicon Valley at least a little bit. Up until a year ago, I was going there and spending about a week out of every month because we had both investor connections. We were also a plug and play company. So there's just a lot of resources out there that aren't necessarily available in Pittsburgh. I know this is like the opposite of like the last point I made, but having that wider world. And with CMU, they plan everything out for you. They make the connections. You get to see the city a little bit in a safe way. And I think it's great. And next, I'd say your classmates are going to be really, really valuable for you. I know when I took Lean Entrepreneurship, my classmates were on my team for interviewing people, making sure that there were things available to help me out. And they were behind me. And I feel like, even with that alumni network, there's people who are still behind me because, a lot of my friends, and they run, family funds that are looking to make investments. They've run, they're really high up in departments where they can be potentially my customers. And you'll see that the CMU network, even beyond graduation, is pretty strong. And finally, like, I'm going to be real about this. Like, so the Leadership Center, like, you do some exercises with them, and I thought they were like really ridiculous. And like, I always had a hard time with all the personality tests because I was like, I don't know exactly what this is teaching me about myself. But the actual coaches within the Leadership Center, especially the faculty ones, are really, really good. And what I really needed was honest feedback about my speaking style, about my dressing style, about how I appear to other people in the business world. And they were really good coaches. They were very honest with me about how to present myself. I know I talk really fast. I will always get admonishment my whole life about the speed with which I talk, but they also taught me how to check in with people, how to simplify my message so that people can understand it, and generally how to just put the best face forward so that I can be successful, whether it's talking to investors, customers, potential hires, whatever I needed. It was really helpful. And there are so many things I wish that I had 5 years ago that you guys have now. I'm sure there's a whole thing to explore in CMU, and I'll just let you know that I'm very jealous about the new building. So the last thing I'll say is that a big resource for us, just to be really frank about what gave us a boost, is, you know, I don't come from wealthy background. You know, I had like at the time when I graduated, my daycare bill was more expensive than my mortgage. And so having the sports fellowship or any kind of scholarship meant that my student loan payments would be smaller or maybe even non-existent, which meant that I could take a risk on starting a company a lot more easily. And because a lot of us, we take really well-paying positions that maybe aren't our hopes and dreams because we have student loan payments. So there are resources out there for you if you're going from first year to second year. I definitely say look into them because making sure that you have the options of paying yourself garbage, which, you know, I'm still not back up to what I was making before I founded a startup, but I live a lot more comfortably than I did when we first started. So I'd say whatever you can do to make sure that your expenses are not impossible when you're trying to start something. And also, I worked for 2 years when we first left Tepper. I ran a product management department, and I spent every sick day, every weekend, every holiday, every evening building this company, and it was really hard. And I don't think I would have had the option to eventually quit my job if I didn't have my expenses and lifestyle in hand. Okay, so I gotta say, one of the things that like I had a really hard time with moving into the working world was, you know, and I think a lot of you guys might identify with this, is like, I was always the really smart kid in school. And I always assumed that I would just ascend the corporate ladder because people would think like, what a smart person, she needs to be in charge. And that's not how things work at all. And I kind of learned it the hard way. That goes double for when you're starting a business, because you think you're really smart, you think you're building something amazing, and if it's not what people want, you're not going to be able to get across the divide. You know, for us, it was a lot of taking time, understanding that we understood the market. And I also say that, you know, not everybody should be an entrepreneur. You should think really hard inside yourself and decide, are you okay with uncertainty? Are you okay with, you know, if things fail, will that change how you think about yourself in the long run? If those things look like they're potentially not good for you, maybe don't do it. But otherwise, like, I realize that I have a hard time with conformity, which I learned when I applied for my first consulting job. And, you know, I really like the uncertainty. And it turns out I'm good at raising money. So we do have health insurance. And I mostly have my sanity right now. So it ended up being a good equation for me. It's not going to be that way for everybody. And I'll say, you know, just to close here, because I think we're hitting time, I'd say a big part of, I think, doing well in this entrepreneurship track and like not losing your mind is understanding that you can't do everything, and that you should recognize both the things that you can't do and you are not good at and you don't want to do. Even if they're like kind of cool things. I would say being able to recognize that inside yourself is really, really important. And then as you grow, surrounding yourself with people who are not only good, but better than you. I think that's really the secret to building a team and growing a company. So anyway, I think I'm already at like the half-hour mark right now. So I'm going to go ahead and pause here and open the floor to questions if anybody has any. And I see a lot in chat, so hopefully it's not people telling me to be quiet or turn on my microphone. Okay, so let me start from the beginning. Oh no, you guys couldn't go on the 2020 trek due to COVID. Yeah, I'm not a surprise. I'm sorry, guys, man. I hope there's other ways to get you guys those connections, because for me, it was really good. Not, you know, not necessarily, it's not possible to do that in later years. So I hope that's something that everybody gets to have a little slice of later on. Okay. So can you discuss on different ways to maintain your relationship with the investors? Like whom did you meet during this trek? Okay, so that's a really good question. So one thing I want to explain is that a lot of people who work as investors don't always stay in the same place. And so it's almost like you want to make sure that you maintain your relationships with people and not with firms. Because I can't tell you how many times I've had contacts who started out, lower on the partner rung, learned enough, and then went and started their own fund. And so, you might be talking to these funds that are a lot larger. They might have, they might want to invest 10 million at a go, which it takes a while to get to that state. But a lot of these people will split off, start smaller seed funds, and they're really, really good contacts to keep up. So there's a couple of things that I do. So for investors that I really, really like and I really want to cultivate, I make sure that I just check in with them once a year, every six months, have like an actual phone call with them with like words and stuff, where I explain, what were our goals, what did we achieve, and so I can show constant forward motion, because I swear every single time we raise a round, it gets easier. And the reason it gets easier is because I've had longer relationships with my potential investors, and I've shown a consistent track record of me saying what I'm going to do and either meeting or exceeding those goals. So things get easier as you get more established, but if you're just starting those relationships from scratch, it can be a lot harder. And a lot of times, investing is a small town. Everybody knows everybody else. So be polite to everybody. But also, if a fund doesn't end up being a match, you can say, who do you think would be a good match for me? And they'll usually refer you. It might be like, well, it's not a good idea for me to invest in this round, but I'll invest in a later round. That's totally how things work. So not taking this stuff personally is really good. The other thing I do is I send out a quarterly update, just like writing what we did. It's kind of like a little newsletter about, what we've achieved as a company. But it also reminds all those investors that I am still alive, and I'm still going, and we're still progressing. And I think that's really important. So like they know every single quarter there's going to be a touch point. One of the things you'll learn in gaining advantage through sales is how to track emails. So you'll know whether or not people are opening stuff, whether they're clicking on things. So that's how you can tell whether or not investors are engaged. And that's how you can know who to move to your short list. So you have your once a year, once every couple of months phone call. So I know I'm probably going to be raising around later on this year. So I've got a set of about a dozen investors that I talk to every 2 months, once a quarter, just to check in. So like as you get more serious, you get a little bit more frequent, but it's because like part of it's that I'm really, really picky about investors. Not just anybody's allowed to invest in BlastPoint. And it helps us maintain a group of investors that like, while they're watching me achieve my goals, I'm making sure that they're not doing things that I don't agree with ethically or for what I want to do long-term with my company. So it means that everybody who invests in me, I trust them or I trust them as much as you can another human being. And I tend to understand their goals. I've been through a couple of exits that did not go well. And so this is something that I learned the hard way from experience. Okay, next question. Are you drawing a salary from BlastPoint? When were you able to do that? How did you plan for that since no money is tough, insurance, et cetera? Yeah, good question. So I did not start drawing a salary from BlastPoint until our third year. And I had a day job. My co-founder quit his job. So what we did was we won the McGinnis Venture competition. We had a little bit of cash. We spent none of it. So we spent the next 8 months basically interviewing everybody who would talk to us. So it ended up being 200 people because we're nerds and we did things the wrong way, which is we built technology in search of a problem. So it took some extra homework to make sure that there was a market behind what we wanted to do. And when that was clear, only then did Tomer quit his job. And for us, me not drawing a salary and still working my rear off was really difficult, but it kept the company together and solvent for longer. And it meant that I could hire in a few areas where I would sort of take the hit. So I still did tech and strategy and finance, but we for example, would have resources to hire for additional people for sales, for example, or marketing. And so we'd have that in place. When I quit my job, we won more pitch competitions. So our pitch competition winnings ended up totaling to almost about 200K. So that was like a good cash cushion. But beyond that, we started getting actual traction and actual customers that were paying us significantly enough where I could see where the growth was happening. And if I added my weight to the payroll, it wouldn't sink us. And so I had to suffer for a bit to make that happen. And like, it was hard for Tomer too, because there was a lot of days where he was just by himself in a cubicle in Alpha Lab. And it's hard not to be able to support your business partner in that way. But we made that sacrifice. And I think in the long run, it was the right choice, because I also got experience in in banking compliance. So I had another piece of the economy under my belt and understanding how things were done, both in the United States, Europe, and beyond. That was really valuable learnings for me to bring to the company. Okay, next question. Have you considered relocating to another robust innovation market, Austin, Denver, or has Pittsburgh been really meeting your needs and will meet your needs for the next 3 to 5 years? I'm pretty clear about this. We are not moving. So I've had to hire, so I have an exit from a Silicon Valley Y Combinator company. I never, ever, ever want to hire in Silicon Valley or New York. It is rough. And even with things changing with COVID and remote work being a lot easier, nope. I don't want to play in that swimming pool. I don't want to have to compete at that level, because you get less for more, and people don't stick around. So I not my thing. The thing is like with Pittsburgh, we're actually really close to a core Midwest set of customers. So most of my customers are in Pittsburgh, Columbus. We've got a few we've got one really big one in South Carolina. So they all tend to be in that Midwestern area. And the thing is, for all of my customers, I'm a plane ride away from every single last one of them. And that's more so now than ever. People are taking meetings over Zoom and doing things a little bit more remotely. So we actually have a national footprint, and actually we have customers in Canada as well. So us being located in Pittsburgh, yeah, I would love the airport to have more. It drives me nuts that like the red-eye flight to Pittsburgh is only available during the summer. Get really upset when that flight goes away. But from a hiring and talent standpoint, it's great. From a cost of living standpoint, it's great. Every single person who works for me makes a living wage for a single person plus 2 children. And that is very important to me, that we're able to make sure that people are not living hand to mouth working for us. And Pittsburgh also has we've had really good relationships with customers here. We've had really good relationships with the local investment community. I will say most of our money comes from outside of Pennsylvania. So Denver, California, New York, the Midwest in general, that's where most of our money comes from. Fundraising can be a little hard in Pittsburgh, but again, you can get on a plane. And honestly, if you're doing well enough, they'll find you and want to invest in you. That's usually not the problem. So that's how I feel about it. We're definitely if we get bought, that's my nightmare, is them moving us to Manhattan or some part of Silicon Valley and us having to deal with living there, which I really like California. I just don't want to ever have to buy a house in anywhere near the Bay. Okay. Okay, next question. Does your company have experience with healthcare data, such as patient engagement, patient campaigns? Note for those outside of healthcare settings, these may be subject to additional regulations due to PHI. So I had a phone call today with Children's Hospital of UPMC. We're doing pro bono work for them. If I can help it, I never want healthcare data in my entire life. So we have really strict cybersecurity requirements. We act like everything is every scrap of data we get is full of credit card numbers and people's STD tests. We are really, really careful with it. But from an insurance perspective, and honestly from a liability perspective, and honestly from a me sleeping at night perspective, I don't want anybody's any information that would be subject to HIPAA. No, thank you. Just because there are such high requirements, it's such a high level of risk if you screw up. For us, we're building mailing lists and doing things that I think are a lot less private. I mean, we do have people's billing information, which is why we treat this stuff like it's sacred. But it's really important that I can get, my feelings are that I can get lots of value out of the data that we have without having to tread in that area. And, I was working on finding fraud in the SWIFT system when it got hacked a few years ago. The SWIFT is an international payment system, for you guys who don't know. And a lot of money was lost. And I'm very happy that there's nothing that I do in my framework that could have, that kind of an impact on anybody's life. That's how I live my life. I'm sure people definitely want to play in that swimming pool. I think it could potentially be very lucrative. For us, there's a very calculated risk to not do that. Okay. Was it hard to raise money, even seed, if you were not working full-time at BlastPoint? How did you manage that with investors? So we didn't do a lot of fundraising while I was working full-time. So we lived off of, honestly, like pitch competitions were like where we really made our money in the beginning. And that was how we got our seed money. So we had that cushion. So I did not have to ask for as much help from investors. We also ended up getting some money through Alpha Lab and Innovation Works. They did a follow-on investment. We also did another accelerator called Quake, which is based on Wall Street in New York. So we ended up getting a significant amount of money from them, and then a pretty heavy amount of follow-on funding from them. So that kept us alive for 2-3 years. So once we started raising money, we'd already been in market. We already had, repeat results. We'd already been selling, and I'd gone from charging $50 a month to $1,000 a month to $5,000 a month and more for our product. So, once we were doing that, it's a lot easier to get investors to answer your call, because like investors, like it's really frustrating because like when you need the money, there's nobody there to help you out with the money. So I'd say one of the most important things you can do is learn how to be really good at pitching and learn alternative sources of funding. Dave always talked about friends, family, and fools. And I have a really hard time with that because like I come from poor people. My co-founder does not come from family wealth either. It's really not an option for us. So our alternative funding was, like I said, we went out and pitched as much as we possibly could. We took feedback. We treated it like it was like we were like symphony musicians, and we had to rehearse regularly. We picked apart our pitch and put it back together. I don't know how many times, but we got to the point where we were really, really good at it. And for us, telling that compelling story made the difference between us having a business and us not having a business. And I'd say, at that seed round, the first time we raised money, it took me 2 years to get all the money that I'd set out to get. And at the end, we were doing so well that I'd hit my goal. And then we had two more investors be like, please, can we give you money? And like the most powerful thing that I've ever seen with investors is me being like, well, I'll think about whether or not I'll let you invest in me. And if you're able to say that to investors, it's like catnip. And, I always want to make sure that we're making enough revenue that it's never a choice between dying or taking money I don't want to take. So I'd say that if you can do that, that's probably one of the biggest areas of strength you can have. Okay. How many customers and full-time part-time employees do you have? It's not a secret. So across all our verticals, we're above 50 customers. In our sort of critical core area, enterprise, we're just below a dozen customers right now. And for employees, I just hired 2 more. So we're currently at 13 full-time people and 1 part-timer. Who is, I have to say, she's a former romance novelist and she's one of our content writers. I highly recommend hiring romance novelists because you will get some amazing copy out of them. Okay. So next question. I think you said you went from charging $50 to $1,000 a month. How did you figure out the initial pricing? How did customers respond to the increase? So this is aligning a lot of things. And actually, I think I have a slide covering this. Here we go. So a lot of the price change came from 2 things. So the first was our target market. So we started out with nonprofits and community development. They don't have a ton of money. They watch every single penny. So $50 a month, like we were so proud of ourselves for being able to charge that much money and have people pay us for that. From there, we moved into emerging brands and retail. So we didn't just move into that next sector. We interviewed tons of people. We found people who are really interested in what we were doing, built features to support them. And we also took our nonprofits and community development customers as much as we could along for the ride. So we made sure that we did really wonderful things for them. We got good reviews. We'd get people to advocate for us if we needed it. And that was how we moved into that next market. And then once we were in that growth market, We were proving ourselves, we were building more features, we had more of a solid end-to-end platform. We were moving into like that next scaling market that was enterprise. But for us, we were looking at, in our growth market, sort of like at a zoomed out sales territory way. For our growth market, it was really clear we were going to have to get to the household level. And once we were able to build that, suddenly it was really clear what the ROI was. We were able to measure it in a really concrete way. And that was how we got to the next level, was we did more features, we built and established ourselves in the verticals we were in, and we moved on to the next. And right now we're staying in enterprise. I'm not going anywhere out of there. But we also, for example, do pro bono work for people in those initial markets, so like nonprofits, because part of it's because I like helping other organizations, and part of it's that, like, who sits on nonprofit board? People who work in these giant companies. So it helps us sort of prove ourselves in a lot of different ways that I think has been beneficial for us long term. Okay, so here's a nice easy one. How old is our company? So our company was founded for the McGinnis competition in 2016. We were officially founded and incorporated in June of 2016. So coming this June will be 5 years old. So those first couple of years, we're with only Tomer full time, and that first year, 8 months was just us doing investigation. So I'd say we didn't dive into it with both feet immediately, which is part of the reason, part of the reason we've been around this long, and part of the reason why it's taken this long to ramp up. But we had a really good year last year. There's no reason to think that we won't have equal, if not better, success this year. And so we've managed to build this company in a sustainable way, built on real foundations and fundamentals that make this a business that's likely to carry us forward through the next 5 years at least. That's the idea. And what's really nice is that I've managed to raise enough money, we've managed to have enough revenue that I know that I have enough in hand in my bank account to get us to 2022. And for me, like, that's how I sleep at night. Okay. When did you do McGinnis, and how did your projections play out with real life? Okay. So McGinnis, we won in 2016, like I said. So here's the secret of dealing with like pitch competitions is it almost doesn't matter what your answers are for things. You just need to be really confident. And so we knew going into McGinnis from talking to past winners and understanding what investors were looking for, were that we needed to feel really confident about our target market. So walking into, when I did lean entrepreneurship, we were looking at real estate. That was not a good target market for us for a lot of reasons that I can explain in detail another time. So we were looking at restaurants. So, we eventually ended up in franchising, so it wasn't that far off. But we needed to sound super confident. We needed to have people who were like, yes, I would buy this. And so we were like, after a certain point, we had to just pick something and go with it. And we ended up choosing, like the restaurants that were like growing. And we talked to as many restaurants as we could. We got as much user data as we could. And I'll be honest, by the time the McGinnis competition was over, it was really clear that restaurants were a terrible choice. And so one of the most important things that we learned was that don't double down just because it looked good at the time. And so that was one of the things we ended up shifting pretty quickly on. From there, we ended up going into community development, and from there, nonprofits. And that ended up being a much, much better fit, at least for that initial beachhead. And so I think our main learning from McGinnis was like what not to do more than anything. Okay, so that was my last question that I see in chat. Does anybody else want to unmute and ask a question or add something to the chat? Because if not, I think we've got 8 minutes left. Okay, I guess I'll turn it back over to Alison. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Alison. This was great. And thanks everybody for joining and your